When a woman discovers the unthinkable in her own home, how far will she go to protect her family? This is the terrifying true story of a crime so horrific that it shook an entire community to its core. Stay with us to uncover the truth behind this brutal murder, and the dark secrets that led to it. Imagine walking into your home after a long day, expecting to find peace, expecting comfort. But instead, you are met with something that will shatter your world forever. Tanya Simmons, a respected pastor, a woman of faith, a mother, she was just like any other wife, living a life many would envy. Or so it seemed. She had always prided herself on her strong family values, on the way she held everything together, the marriage, the ministry, the home. Yet, one evening, as she opened the door to the sanctuary of her family, Tanya would find something that would pull everything she knew into chaos. The man she had loved for years, the father of her son, was standing before her, engaged in an act so vile, so horrific, that her mind could hardly process it. In the blink of an eye, everything Tanya knew would be torn apart. Dwayne Simmons, her husband, the man she had trusted more than anyone in this world, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. And her son, Marcus, a vulnerable 17-year-old boy, was the victim. The weight of this discovery would change Tanya forever. What does a woman do when she is faced with such horror? When the life she has built, the very foundation of her faith, is shattered by the very man who promised to protect her and their family? What would you do? The very thought of betrayal, of her world crumbling, left Tanya paralyzed at the door. And in that moment, a choice was made, an irreversible decision that would set off a chain of events none of them could escape. Dwayne had no idea the storm that was coming. He never expected Tanya, the woman who had stood by his side for so many years, would ever find out his dark secret. But in the dim light of their living room, Tanya's eyes locked onto the truth she had never wanted to see. There was no turning back. As Tanya stood frozen in disbelief, the weight of what she had just witnessed started to build, pushing her to a breaking point. The man who had been her partner, the one she trusted with her life, was now someone unrecognizable, a monster in her eyes. The room was silent, but Tanya's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of it all. She had walked into her home, expecting the comfort of her family, expecting her husband to be the man she thought she knew. But what she found was something she could never unsee, something that would haunt her forever. A 911 call was placed, but by the time the operator answered, it was too late. Tanya had already taken matters into her own hands. The events that followed would become a public spectacle, but behind closed doors, a mother's fury had been unleashed. Tanya's faith in her husband, in everything she had believed in, had been shattered. Her love for Marcus, her need to protect him, became all-consuming. In the heat of the moment, she did what she thought was necessary. What was right, in her mind. But the world wouldn't see it that way. The truth would come out slowly, piece by piece, and the people who had once praised Tanya as a pillar of the community would now question everything they thought they knew about her. They would ask themselves how a woman, a mother, a pastor, could commit such a horrific act. How far would someone go when pushed to the edge? And as Tanya's world unraveled, the investigation would reveal the twisted layers of deceit, the hidden secrets, and the truths no one could have imagined. The betrayal, the shock, the horror, these things would become the foundation of the case. But in the end, was Tanya a victim herself, driven by love and desperation, or was she simply a woman who lost control? As the case unfolds, the question remains, what happens when the line between justice and vengeance is crossed? When the weight of betrayal forces someone to take matters into their own hands? Was Tanya justified in her actions, or was there something more to the story? This is the case of Tanya Simmons, her marriage, her family, her faith, all torn apart by a truth too dark to accept. And the journey to uncover the truth will lead to a conclusion that no one saw coming. Stay with us as we explore the shocking details of what really happened that fateful night. The answers may be harder to face than anyone could have imagined. The events that unfolded in the following hours were nothing short of chaotic. Tanya Simmons, her mind racing, her heart pounding with the weight of the discovery she had just made, knew there was no going back. Her hands were shaking as she stood in the living room, staring at her husband, who had become a complete stranger in her eyes. The life they had built, the home they had created, suddenly felt like a facade, one that could no longer be trusted. As Tanya stood there, trying to process the grotesque scene she had walked in on, she felt a surge of emotion that was almost too overwhelming to describe. Anger, disbelief, betrayal, all of it swirled within her like a storm she couldn't control. How could Dwayne do this? How could the man she loved, the father of her child, be involved in something so horrific? How could he violate the very foundation of their family, their faith, their trust? Marcus, her 17-year-old son, was in no condition to defend himself. He had a disability, making him more vulnerable than most. Tanya had always been his protector. She had spent years shielding him from the world's cruelty, doing everything in her power to make sure he was safe and loved. Yet, in that very moment, the person she had entrusted to help her raise him had destroyed that sense of safety. Dwayne didn't say a word at first, but his eyes darted nervously, his body language giving away the panic he was feeling. He could see the fury in Tanya's eyes. He knew that he had crossed a line that no amount of apology could ever erase. And yet, the reality of his situation didn't hit him until he saw Tanya's trembling hands slowly moving toward the drawer where she kept the knife. Tanya's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind racing. She didn't know what was happening to her. The anger boiled over, an uncontrollable surge of emotion that left her with no clear thoughts, just an overpowering need to make him pay for what he had done. The man who had promised to love and protect her was now the very thing she had sworn to fight against. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Her faith, the core of her existence, screamed at her to stop, to walk away. But the weight of betrayal was too much. Tanya's mind went blank, the world around her closing in. She grabbed the knife. And in one swift motion, the life she had known was gone. She had crossed a line that would change everything. The sound of the knife falling to the floor echoed through the house, breaking the eerie silence. Tanya stood over her husband, her heart pounding in her chest, the reality of what she had just done sinking in. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't thought about the consequences. In that moment, everything she had ever believed in seemed irrelevant. Dwayne was dead. And her son, Marcus, was left in the wake of this unimaginable tragedy. In the chaos that followed, Tanya didn't know what to do. The panic set in. She couldn't think clearly. She needed help. But who could she turn to? The authorities were only a phone call away, yet Tanya couldn't bring herself to make that call. How could she explain what had just happened? How could she confess that she had taken the life of the man she once loved, the man who had been her partner in everything? Her hands were stained with blood, but her mind was still racing. There was no way to undo what had been done. Her life, her family, her entire existence had been shattered beyond recognition. But Tanya didn't want to face the consequences of her actions. She knew that whatever came next would be the beginning of a nightmare she had no idea how to survive. As the night drew on, Tanya remained in the house with her son, each of them left alone with the consequences of their own choices. Marcus, unaware of the gravity of the situation, sat silently in his room. Tanya had always tried to protect him, to shield him from the world's cruelty. But now, she had to protect him from herself. She didn't know how to explain what had happened, or what would come next. At some point, Tanya made the decision to call 911. The operator's calm voice contrasted sharply with the chaos Tanya was feeling inside. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. What was she supposed to say? How could she explain the unthinkable? I need help. My husband is dead, Tanya stammered into the phone, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to. I caught him. He was, with our son. The operator paused, then began asking questions, but Tanya couldn't form coherent answers. She was on autopilot, her mind in a fog. All she knew was that Dwayne was gone, and her life would never be the same. When the police arrived, they found Tanya standing in the doorway, the weight of the situation clear on her face. She didn't resist. She didn't fight back. She simply collapsed into their arms, knowing that there was no escaping what she had done. Her confession was raw, filled with grief and guilt. She had acted out of rage, out of a need to protect her son, but she knew that the law would not see it that way. The investigation that followed was intense. Detectives scoured the house, looking for evidence, trying to piece together the events that had led to Dwayne's death. They found the knife, they found blood, they found Tanya's frantic statements. But what they couldn't find was any sign of remorse. Tanya wasn't speaking anymore. She had fallen silent, consumed by the overwhelming weight of her actions. As the days turned into weeks, the truth slowly came out. Tanya's actions would be debated in court. Was she justified in what she did? Could anyone truly understand the pain she had endured? The evidence painted a complex picture, one that left the public divided. Some believed Tanya had been driven to madness by the betrayal of her husband, the violation of her son. Others saw it as cold-blooded murder, an unforgivable crime. But in the end, the question remained, how far could a person be pushed before they snapped? And what happens when the very person who is supposed to protect you becomes the greatest threat? Tanya's life, once filled with love and faith, would never be the same. The consequences of that fateful night would echo through every corner of her existence, leaving a trail of destruction that could never be undone. As Tanya faced trial, the nation watched, gripped by the tragedy of it all. Was Tanya a victim of circumstance, or had she crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? The verdict would come, but no decision could ever truly bring back what was lost. And so, the case of Tanya Simmons, her world forever changed, her faith shattered, remained a story of deep pain, of love twisted into something unrecognizable. The answers, though painful, were there for anyone willing to confront them. But in the end, would it ever be enough to heal the wounds that had been inflicted, or was this a tragedy too deep to ever understand fully? This is not just a story of murder. It's a story of betrayal, love, and the limits of a person's ability to endure. It's a story of a family torn apart by something no one could ever have predicted. And it's a reminder that sometimes, the darkest secrets are the ones that come from the people we trust the most. The days following Tanya's arrest were a blur of conflicting emotions. The media had latched onto the story like a hungry animal, their cameras and microphones forever trained on the family home. News outlets were quick to sensationalize the details, capturing the public's fascination with the tragedy. Some painted Tanya as a grieving mother who had been pushed too far, while others saw her as a cold-blooded killer who had taken justice into her own hands. No matter the angle, one thing was clear, the story was captivating the entire city of Atlanta, and beyond. The authorities moved quickly in their investigation. Detectives and forensic experts combed through every inch of the house where Dwayne's life had come to an abrupt end. They found the bloody trail leading to his lifeless body, the knife that had been used with deadly force. But it wasn't the physical evidence alone that had everyone talking. It was the chilling realization that the murder had not been a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion, but the culmination of years of hidden secrets and buried pain. Dwayne had kept a life secret from his wife, and that secret had been revealed in the most horrifying way. The details of his relationship with Marcus, Tanya's disabled son, were slow to surface, but when they did, they shocked everyone. The investigators uncovered text messages, photographs, and even video recordings that painted a disturbing picture of a man who had been living a double life. Dwayne, a respected pastor in the community, had been hiding his sexual abuse of his own son, his vulnerable, disabled son, for years. Marcus had been too young to understand the weight of what had been happening to him, but Tanya, the ever-watchful mother, had known something was wrong for a long time. Tanya had suspected something for months, but she had been too afraid to confront Dwayne about it. Their marriage had been strained, but she had never suspected it would come to something so horrific. What she found that fateful night was more than she could have ever imagined. The evidence was damning. Dwayne had been living a double life. He had been grooming Marcus, taking advantage of his son's disability, and forcing him into an unimaginable situation. The discovery of Dwayne's secret was devastating, and Tanya's reaction was one of both disbelief and rage. She had loved him. She had married him. Together, they had built a life and a family, and yet he had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way imaginable. The betrayal ran deeper than just a broken marriage, it cut to the core of Tanya's identity as a mother and a protector. No longer able to rationalize the man she had once loved, Tanya's fury erupted. She could feel the heat of anger rising within her, a fire that could no longer be contained. The prosecutor, an experienced and calculating woman named Alicia Henderson, was determined to bring Tanya to justice, but she knew that this case wasn't going to be like any other. The emotional complexity of the situation was undeniable. Tanya had committed murder, but it wasn't a simple crime of malice. There were layers of trauma, years of abuse, and an undeniable sense of victimization woven into the fabric of Tanya's actions. Henderson's challenge was to ensure that the jury understood the depth of the situation without excusing the murder. After all, no matter how understandable Tanya's actions were, taking someone's life could never truly be justified. In the court of public opinion, Tanya was being torn apart. Social media erupted with polarized opinions. Some were sympathetic, mourning the tragedy that had unfolded within the walls of a family they thought they knew. Others were unforgiving, condemning Tanya for the brutality of her actions, insisting that there were other ways to deal with betrayal. Inside the courtroom, Tanya's defense attorney, an experienced lawyer named Samuel Harris, struggled with the case he had been handed. He knew that the jury would have a hard time reconciling Tanya's grief with the cold reality of her actions. But he also knew that her state of mind had been altered by years of emotional trauma. Harris was preparing a defense that would focus on Tanya's mental state at the time of the crime. He would argue that Tanya's discovery of Dwayne's abuse had pushed her to the brink of madness. The mind of a mother, deeply wounded by betrayal, could not be expected to act rationally in that moment. She was, in essence, a woman pushed too far, and in her rage, she had reacted in the only way she could. The courtroom drama was intense. The prosecution presented evidence that painted Dwayne as a monster, and the defense countered with Tanya's emotional breakdown after discovering the truth. Forensic psychologists testified about the trauma Tanya had endured over the years, the constant fear she had felt for her son's safety. The prosecution argued that no amount of emotional turmoil could justify murder, while the defense contended that Tanya had been driven to insanity by the unbearable weight of what she had discovered. The case turned into an emotional battlefield, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. The families of both Tanya and Dwayne sat in the courtroom, their faces betraying years of hidden pain. Tanya's own family was divided, some sympathized with her, understanding the depth of her trauma, while others, including her older brother, believed she had crossed an unforgivable line. Dwayne's family, on the other hand, was heartbroken by the loss, but many of them remained silent, unsure how to reconcile the man they had known with the horrific truth that had come to light. In the months leading up to the trial's conclusion, Tanya struggled with her own emotions. She spent long hours in her jail cell, replaying the events of that night over and over in her mind. What had she done? Had she truly lost control, or had she made a calculated decision to take the life of the man who had destroyed everything she held dear? Her own faith, which had once been the bedrock of her life, was now in tatters. Tanya had no answers. She had no way of knowing what the future would hold. She only knew that her world had come crashing down, and there was no turning back. The trial finally reached its verdict. Tanya Simmons was found guilty of second-degree murder, but the jury recommended a reduced sentence. They believed that Tanya's actions had been heavily influenced by the abuse Dwayne had inflicted on Marcus, and they took into account her emotional state during the crime. The judge, however, was tasked with deciding her fate. The courtroom held its breath as the final sentencing was delivered. Tanya was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but the emotional toll of the case had already taken its toll on her. Her life, once full of promise and faith, had been irrevocably altered. She would serve time, but the scars of the events would follow her for the rest of her life. Marcus, who had been left behind in the aftermath, struggled to come to terms with what had happened. He had lost both of his parents in the span of a single night. The one person he had trusted and loved had turned into a nightmare, and the other had been taken from him by the very hands of the person who should have protected him most. And so, the tragic story of Tanya Simmons came to an end, but the ripples of her actions would echo through the community for years to come. The town of Atlanta would never forget the pastor's dark secret, the devastation it caused, and the woman who had done what she thought was necessary to protect her son. In the end, there were no winners. There were only victims. Tanya, Marcus, Dwayne, each of them caught in a web of pain, betrayal, and irreversible choices. As the years passed, the memory of the case would linger in the minds of those who followed it. The questions remained: was Tanya justified in her actions? Could anyone truly understand the depth of the suffering she endured? After his mother's conviction, Marcus was placed into the care of his aunt, who had been a steady presence in his life before the tragedy. She tried her best to offer him a sense of normalcy, but nothing could ever be the same. Marcus was a shell of the boy he had once been. The constant reminders of his past, the images of his father, the whispers of the community, it all weighed heavily on him. His aunt's home, though filled with love, could never replace the stability that he had lost. In the years following, Marcus tried to heal, tried to move forward, but the trauma remained. Therapy sessions were met with resistance. His counselor tried to help him navigate the painful memories, but no amount of talking could undo the years of manipulation, abuse, and betrayal. Marcus had become a young man hardened by his experiences, forced to grow up too quickly, to process his pain in ways that no one should ever have to. Despite everything, there were moments when Marcus began to show signs of recovery. He started volunteering at a local shelter, helping others who had been affected by trauma. It was his way of reclaiming a sense of control, of making something positive out of the wreckage that had been his life. But even as he tried to rebuild, there were always those dark moments when the past would come crashing back. The nightmares, the haunting memories, the sense of powerlessness, it was always just beneath the surface, waiting to rise again. As for Tanya, her prison sentence became a life sentence in many ways. The world had moved on, but she was still trapped in the cycle of regret and reflection. The years inside only deepened her understanding of what she had done, what she had lost, and what could never be regained. She had no delusions about her situation. There was no forgiveness for her in the eyes of the law, nor in the eyes of her community. Tanya had destroyed everything that had once mattered to her. The man she had loved, the family she had built, the faith she had once held dear, gone. But the most painful truth she had to live with was that she had never truly known the man she had married. Dwayne's betrayal had revealed a darkness that she could never have imagined, a side of him that had been hidden behind a mask of charm and righteousness. The man she had shared her life with had not been who he appeared to be, and that realization was one of the hardest pills for Tanya to swallow. She had been deceived, manipulated, and gaslighted into believing a lie. And now, the consequences of that deception were irreversible. Years into her sentence, Tanya would receive letters from people who had once been her friends, people who had been part of her church family. Some of the letters were filled with anger and accusations, while others expressed sympathy. But no letter could ever undo what had been done. And no matter how much she wished for things to be different, the reality of her situation was clear. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. One day, Tanya sat alone in her cell, reflecting on everything that had led her to this point. The pain, the betrayal, the violence, all of it weighed on her in ways that words could never capture. She closed her eyes and thought of Marcus, the son she had tried so hard to protect, and wondered if he would ever forgive her. If he would ever find peace. But peace was a distant dream, one that was slowly slipping further away. The events that had shattered their lives had left an indelible mark, and as Tanya sat there, looking out through the small window of her prison cell, she realized that some scars never truly heal. And for Marcus, for herself, and for the memory of Dwayne, there would never be a way to erase the pain, only to live with it. As this heart-wrenching story unfolds, we're left with more questions than answers. Can anyone truly heal from such deep betrayal? Was justice served, or is there still a lingering mystery surrounding the truth? What do you think? Was Tanya's crime a result of an emotional breakdown, or did she make a choice in cold blood? Do you believe Marcus will ever find peace after the horrors he's faced? We want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your theories. What could have been done differently? What do you think this case says about the lengths people go to when they're pushed to their limits? Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that dive deep into the heart of mystery, justice, and the human experience. If you found this video gripping, hit that like button, and share it with others who need to hear this story. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned.